welcome to Viewpoint, your program of personality and politicians and perspectives. And this morning we have the latter two, the politician. Happy to have him with us, and we're going to have Mrs. Busby make a formal introduction shortly. And we'll certainly have some perspectives. You may remember, sir, that we always try to start Viewpoint with a kudo or two or something about happening in the community. Kind of a double-edged kudo for Oldville this morning. We had a young Lincoln man who died sometime several weeks ago now, a great kid, and it was suggested by a former Lincolnite, John Fuller, and a kudo to John for that suggestion, that we name Logan County, incorporate Norm Clark's name into our airport out here, Norm Clark Field. Well, I was much surprised this morning due to my naivete, and maybe I'm just goosing my edge at the old guy, but I thought that'd be a shoe-in. Well, turned out it's not a shoe-in. And so had nothing to do with the kudo there. You all get a raspberry on that, folks. They have to study that over. And I just thought, had I known that several people were going to show up in support of that, I sure would have been there. And my kudo is that, once again, civic-minded John Gossett, our former mayor, whom you know very well, who we all know and love here, there was some idea about maybe be some expense involved. Well, John stepped right up to the plate and got his bat in hand and said he'd take care of any expense. And so kudos to John Gossett for that. And I'd like to ask the county board to get their act together. It doesn't seem to me that it's very difficult to name something. It was pointed out by my young friend Curtis Fox, and I respect him very much, that maybe there are others in the community who've contributed a lot. And I respect what you said, Curtis. I would simply add to that anybody whose name might be worthy of consideration that would be delighted to step aside and defer to Norm Clark. So that's my kudo and that's my speech. And I'm going to let you go right ahead and introduce our guest now. We get down to serious business.
Well, okay. Here we are going now. Our guest today is Tim Butler, our representative in Springfield. And we're awfully happy that you came to be with us. It is the Happy New Year. We're how many days into it now? 5?
The 6th. That would be 6.
The 6th.
The Epiphany.
It is
Today's Epiphany.
There you
go. The 12th day of Christmas.
The 12th day. We used to have, they'd pick up all the Christmas trees. This is when everybody had real trees. They'd go down the curb.
They're still doing that.
Pick them all up, and then they'd have a 12th night burning at Ralph Gale Field in front of the junior high here in Lincoln. And I tell you, it was a heck of a burning when you get that many evergreen trees in a pile. That went for a bit. At any rate, since it's the Happy New Year, the laws that you have been passing in Springfield now
or not passing,
as the case may be, now all
that can't be. That's not a bad thing. Sometimes.
Exactly. Amen. Yeah. Sometimes when they say that you're not in session for a while, the people say, "Well, there's a blessing."
Absolutely.
But at any rate, the laws that were passed go into effect. How in the world do we know what the laws are? The one that I heard about that I thought was a really good idea was if you're terminally ill, you can opt to sign on for a treatment modality that hasn't been
It's called the right to try legislation.
Approved by the FDA. And I say, good deal. Why not? Who knows? It might be the answer. So I thought that was a real good idea. But how about the other? How many laws?
So there's 237 laws that took effect as of January 1.
Yeah.
That were passed by the General Assembly this last year and signed by the governor. I think we passed. I think there was over 500 pieces of legislation that we passed out of the House. Usually the media, I think the media does a pretty good job of covering, there's usually these year-end reviews about, here's 10 new laws that are going on the books. So if you're reading the newspaper or watching the news, usually they do a good job of covering what some of the highlights of the new laws are. But if anybody has any questions, I actually have a list of all 237, a summary of all of them. I'd be happy to get it out to someone if they'd like to see it or if they contact our office. Some of the right to try legislation was a good piece of legislation like like you talked about. I was asked the other day on a TV interview about a couple of good laws, and that's a good one. The terminally ill patients don't have to wait if they've passed phase 1 of FDA approval. People can now get those in Illinois. Doctors won't be penalized for prescribing those and things like that. So that was a good piece of legislation. But there's, I mean, it's tough for people to keep track of everything. It really is. And
I could walk out of here and break 5 laws.
Some of them, you know, a lot of them are things that pass that, you know, we have a new state pie in Illinois, the pumpkin pie. We have a new vegetable in Illinois, the sweet corn. So, you know,
I'm glad to hear that.
But you know, there's a lot of laws that people, I mean, it's hard for people to keep track of. That's for sure.
For sure.
Kim, there's a lot of inane, excuse me, honey.
Go for it.
Well, there's a lot of inane talk down there. Pumpkin pie. Who the hell cares what state or
if you go up the road to Morton and go up 155 to Morton, they care a lot about pumpkin pie.
That's in your district, and you know that.
Not quite, but it's right. I go right up to Morton.
It's kind of border that quite.
Yeah, there would be that. One thing that I heard mentioned was now that we have medical marijuana in the sovereign state of Illinois, they thought maybe we should look at decriminalization. And that to me sounds like that's step 2 to legalization. Where did that end, that discussion?
So the decriminalization bill, which would basically reduce the penalties for small possession of marijuana. So if you've got a kid that's walking around with a couple joints or some pot and he gets busted, he's not getting a felony put on his record. He's going to get a ticket for it, and you know, it's not going to go on his permanent record as a felony, something like that. The idea is to clear up the court system to make sure that these small drug offenses aren't a problem clogging up our court system and staying on somebody's record permanently. That got mandatorily vetoed by the governor to change some of the provisions of it, to up the penalties of the amount of the ticket, to lower the threshold for the THC level in someone for a DUI. It also established a pot DUI for the first time, which I thought was a good thing, because we've got medical marijuana that's already coming down the pike, already started, and we don't have any regulations in place for a pot DUI, and I think that's an important thing. So it was mandatorily vetoed, and then the legislature did not act on that mandatory veto, so it didn't change. So the decriminalization has not taken effect. It is going to be there's a member from suburban or the north side of Chicago that reintroduced the legislation. I would imagine it'll come up again this spring. I actually supported that legislation because I think I talked to several states' attorneys about it. I didn't view it as a step towards recreational legalization. I viewed it as, number one, it established a pot DUI for the first time, and secondly, it helps clear up our court system and so we can go after things that we need to be going through on the court system. So.
Ask a question, please. A mandatory veto, does that indicate that in general the governor was in concurrence with it, but there's some things about it that he'd like to see changed? Is that the essence of that?
That's pretty much the essence of what it is, yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much. So what
the concept that he was against, it was the matter, he saw some things in there that, according to him, he thought ought to be changed.
Correct. That's correct. Yep.
Speaking of the governor, he was elected, I think, primarily because he was anti this tax and spend mentality that Illinois has lived under for eons. And obviously, it's not a good practice. I mean, it's not worked for us, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. So if we elected him because he's anti that mentality, then why in the world can't the legislature get together and do something about changing that? You hear statistics right along about the number of people who have left Illinois because of the taxes. You hear of the industries that have left Illinois because of the taxes. Now, the mayor of Chicago is raising personal property taxes substantially. Now, to me, that flies in the face of trying to do something about tax and spend. Nobody talks about cutting out on the spending.
You make a great point. The budget that was passed to the governor, you know, the Democrats control the General Assembly, super majorities in the House and the Senate, and the budget that they passed to the governor earlier this year for fiscal year 16 was $4 billion out of balance. We have $32 billion under our current current tax structure in Illinois, we have $32 billion that's coming in the door this year. The Democrats passed them a spending plan that was at $36 billion. And
go figure.
That to me is, I don't get it. I really don't get it. We need to live within our means. And if you want to spend at a $36 billion level, which the Democrats obviously want to do, then put a vote up on the board to raise taxes that much, because that's not going to pass. So what I don't understand is it's frustrating for me when I listen to debate on the floor and the Democrats will say, well, just raise taxes. Just raise taxes. We have to spend at this level. We don't have to spend at that level. We really don't. There's a lot of worthy programs out there. I have yet to have somebody walk in my door and say, hey, cut my program. But we can't, we can't. The government largesse can't be for everyone. We have to rein in spending and really get it under control. I think that your question also about the taxes and driving up, it's not just the tax rates in Illinois that drive out businesses. It's the entire climate in the state of Illinois, the regulatory climate, the business climate. I mean, the regulatory climate that we put on businesses. I talked to I don't want to say exactly who it is, but a Lincoln business, a fairly substantial Lincoln business that wants to double their size up to over 500 employees, and they don't want to do it in Illinois. They don't want to do it in Illinois.
Isn't that just very, very, very significant?
There's a message there.
Right.
There is. The legislature talks left and right about pensions being such a problem. The negotiations by the unions has taken place. They've acquiesced to all these demands over the years. There's nothing you can do about that. You can change agreements with new hirees, but you can't do anything about the pensions. But it's talked about. Now, when they talk about doing something about the expense of pensions, do they ever talk about the expense of keeping the legislators on the dole for the rest of their natural life?
Yeah, so that's a couple things there. So the legislative pensions are obviously sticks in the craw of a lot of people. I'm a person who's not going to take a legislative pension. We've got, I think, about 50 members right now that have already declined the fact that they're not going to take a legislative pension. I mean, I think we get in these jobs to do the jobs that we get put in here for, and it's not because of a pension or something like that.
There's a shining star.
The issue with the pensions for state employees and for the public pensions in Illinois, we've got about $110 billion unfunded pension liability right now because we haven't paid enough into the system over the years. And it is written in the Constitution that you can't diminish a public employee's pension. And that was the court case that was decided earlier last year and throughout the pension reform law that was passed by the General Assembly and signed by Quinn. So we do have to look at it prospectively. We need to look forward and realize how we're going to change the pension system going forward. And we got to have everybody at the table. We got to have the governor at the table and the legislature, and we've got to have the union folks at the table too. Because if we don't have the union at the table, they're going to go to court and they're going to say, and we're going to end up in the same position we are. So everybody's got to come together to figure out a deal. We can't continue the path we're going down. I mean, our unfunded pension liability is way too high. It's unsustainable. We've got to figure out something.
We were talking off air this morning, Tim. Mr. Butler, our representative here in the 87th Congressional District.
87th. The 407 district.
648-5510. Somebody might have a question for you, Representative. We were talking off air, sir. The power that has been continually wielded down there in Springfield. Yes, you just had your 30th high school class reunion, and the Speaker of the House became Speaker when you were a junior in high school. Sophomore in high school. Now, what does that tell you?
He'd been there too long.
Been there a long time.
Quick math, folks.
Been there a long time.
I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure that out.
It makes you wonder about term limits.
It goes back to that old saying, power corrupts and absolute power absolutely corrupts, or versions thereof. I'm not saying that he's corrupt, but power gets entrenched, and they don't want to give a doggone thing up. Mm-hmm. Now, what is this business that legislators and our congressmen too particularly out there in Foggy Bottom, they can pass laws, but they are not. They're not relative to the laws. They're excused from the laws. That's wrong.
Yeah, Congress, actually, U.S. Congress, after Republicans took control in '94, actually changed that. There was.
I did not know that.
There was a law that was passed that made all the applicable federal laws also applicable to Congress as well. That actually went into effect after the 1994 elections when Gingrich became Speaker. That was actually a part of the contract with America. That was one of the planks of the contract with America. And so that actually has been in effect now for 20 years in D.C. The power structure in Springfield, term limits are an answer. Redistricting reform is an answer. I really think that the true, and you're never going to see it, but really what we need to do is have leadership term limits. We can have term limits on members like myself, but we need to term limit the leaders.
Absolutely.
And that's another thing that happened in Washington on the Republicans after the 94 elections. They instituted leadership term limits of 6 years, and you can only be speaker or chairman or whatever for 6 years. I think that's what we should do. I mean, there's plenty of good people that can do these jobs. There's plenty of good people. They might view the world a little differently, or they might not be exactly the same. But there was a good person doing this job before me. There's going to be a good person doing this job after me. And term limits, and especially leadership term limits, I think would be a great way to get fresh ideas. Change take place, a way that we can move the state forward, because obviously the people that are entrenched in power right now are not doing it for the state of Illinois.
They're not moving.
Nope. There's the problem.
Anywhere.
648-5510. Now, Judy and I know that some people out there are mad at Tim Butler for some reason or another, and he can field any questions very adroitly. We invite your queries. Not every day you get a chance to sit down and have a coffee talk with your representative or your state senator, for that matter. So take advantage of that, folks. Tim, looking down the road, what one thing would you see that would be of import in the immediate or near future? What do you see? Anything coming down the pike?
Well, I think the biggest thing is we need to get this budget situation figured out. This is now we're into our 7th month without a formal state budget. Though we have 90% of state budget, the state government that's being funded right now because of court opinions and continuing appropriations and things like that. And that's not the way we should do business. We should get our budget passed. It should be a budget that we live within our means. And I think that's got to be the top priority. I'm very frustrated that we haven't seen one so far. And as we mentioned off air, there was a story that came out last night where the spokesman for Speaker Madigan said that the Speaker says we're not going to have a budget till April. Well, that just proves to me that they're disingenuous.
He's not interested.
Yeah, they're disingenuous in their negotiations. If he already thinks there's going to be something that's not going to happen before the primary in March, right. Mm-hmm. And it's all. I mean, I think the Speaker views it through a very political lens, that he doesn't want his members on having a vote who might be in a primary before the primary, and I don't think that's right. We've got to do good by the people of Illinois and get a budget passed, and I think that means obviously compromises on both sides. And I think the governor's come a long way on a lot of things on his turnaround agenda to whittle it down to a few things that say these are my priorities. And I think the Speaker and President Cullerton need to come to the table and say, all right, we're willing to deal too. Let's figure out what the common ground here, and let's get a budget done and move forward.
Yeah, Mr. and Mrs. Joe Citizen out there on Main Street and from K Road to Rockford, we're all disgusted because it's an us versus them mentality. Mm-hmm. It's not a matter of sitting down across the table and Tim and Bill and Judy talking and Jim Ash. We might even include Jim. But seriously, there just seems to be a total inability to sit down and rationally and civilly talk about these issues, which are terribly important. It's a Democrat versus Republican mentality, and that's wrong. It's,
we let politics cloud things too much when we should let policy drive the wagon. I mean, that's really the fact of the matter. Once the election happened last year, we need to get beyond it and move forward, and we haven't done that really. And Now we come into an election year where everybody starts looking through that political lens again. We get in these positions to do good by the people, and that's I think how we have to approach it. And you're not going to get anything done unless you're sitting across the table talking to people, and that's civilly
with an objective in mind.
There were some meetings in December. There were 3 meetings in December with the 4 legislative leaders and the governor. At least 3 of them were. The speaker didn't show up to the last one, so so that's a positive sign. And I've urged them, now that we're in the new year, get back together soon, and I would urge them to get together every day. You can get together in Springfield. You can get together in Chicago. You can get together in Cairo. I don't care. I've offered my front porch in my house in Springfield if they want to come hang out with me. I got a nice view of Lincoln Park. They're more than happy. I probably have beer in the fridge too. So, they need to. I think they need to get together every day until they hammer something out.
This is why we plain people get to thinking that the legislature thinks only me, myself, our 2 kids, us 4, no more. It's all for me and my next election and my bennies that come with the job. They don't give a toot about the constituency.
Well, I think there's a real frustration with that out there. I will say, the people that I know, by and large, in the General Assembly that I've gotten to know are good, well-intentioned people that want to do good things for their constituents. And I think there's a lot of people on both sides of the aisle. I think there's a lot of Democrats that are frustrated as well at the lack of progress with their leaders. And so I think people get in these jobs mostly and want to do good things. And like I said, when now 50 or some members of the General Assembly have turned down the pension, I think that's a good sign that people know that they want to go in there and do the right thing for people. But I understand the frustration that people see. I mean, it's government can be a frustrating thing for a lot of people to take a look at, especially with so much inaction right now.
You mentioned the unfunded pensions. And I think that I, for one, and maybe half a dozen other people in the state, kind of think of the pensions as being robbed a lot. We have a fund that's for this pension, but we borrow from it. Without worrying too much about paying it back even. That's why they're underfunded.
Right. Exactly. And people's pensions are getting paid right now. I mean, that's, if you've got a state pension, you're getting your pension. The problem is, as the unfunded liability goes up, eventually that's going to come home to roost at some point when there's enough people that are retired that we're not able to pay it. That's why
think of the impact on that down the road. That's going to make a huge impact on families throughout the entire state.
Absolutely.
You mentioned that you would like to talk a little bit about school funding. I've lived in the state of Illinois for 50 years. You talk about non-movement on something. I think 50 years ago I heard that we've got to address this school funding question, and we're going to do that now. And that's been 50 years. So is now the now, or is now a different now?
Well, there's been a big focus on this, I think, especially over the last couple of years. And there was legislation that Senator Menard, who's from Macoupin County, introduced a couple of years ago to reform the funding formula to try to make it more equitable across the state. And I think it's a worthy effort. The problem is there's winners and losers under that one. And I've got some districts and school districts in the area that I represent, Olympia being one of them, that would be a big loser under this funding change. So we need to make sure that the funding formula is equitable across the state. So some of these districts, especially in downstate Illinois, these rural districts, have the resources to compete on the same level that a school in the suburbs might. We've this year actually the one piece of the budget that the governor did sign was the K through 12 education portion of the budget. And we actually, for the last many years, we've underfunded education from the state level. So for the general state aid formula, we funded it over the last several years from 85 to 87% of what they should be getting. This year, we actually raised it up to 92%. So it's not up to 100%, but we actually raised money going to K through 12 education from the state. But so much of what much of what also that goes to schools, that pays for our schools, is through your property taxes as well. And so one of the things that I think we have to do is not put so many burdens on the local schools. We pass a lot of, here's one interesting thing that I didn't think a lot about going into this job last March. We pass on a lot of unfunded mandates to our schools. I hadn't given it much thought at all. And that makes it tough for our local schools, because that adds cost to our local school system that's going to come out mostly out of your property tax dollars. So we need to figure out a formula that like I said, is equitable for districts across the state. Last
night on the news, there was an item about a fellow who was involved in higher education in Illinois. This is beyond the K through 12. And he got his feelings hurt because he published something that wasn't appropriate according to the powers that be. And so they weren't going to hire him. So he got bought off.
For $600,000.
And you hear about this in higher ed, you know, that, well, we don't need you anymore in this position, so we're going to send you on your merry way to find something else to do. But we'll give you a couple million here. Yeah. And what in the name of thunder is that?
So, this is really something
stupidity.
that frustrates a lot of people as well. And you've seen some high-profile cases here recently in Illinois with the University of Illinois, especially with the Salida issue, which I think was, I think the university was well within their rights not to hire Salida as a professor there, given some of the stuff he had said.
Well, but they hurt his feelings.
And then you see the Chancellor Wise gets. She steps down and gets a $400,000 severance, things like this. The one, and then you see, I don't know, up in the suburbs, College of DuPage, the community college, where it's just an administration run amok at the College of DuPage. They built a new restaurant with a wine cellar for the community college. The president got over $1 million golden parachute because on his way out the door, stuff like that. So we actually passed a law this year. It's directed at the community colleges more so than the four-year universities that would rein in these payments for if people who leave early and get fill out their contract for $400,000, $500,000, things like that would rein in that I believe they wouldn't have it set the parameters for what you could negotiate as to what somebody's severance package would be. That reined it in a lot.
Well, it's just ludicrous. Don't they know down there that there's no free lunch?
Absolutely.
If you're going to give these people this kind of money, it's going to affect the students that they want to come there to educate because of their tuition, and it's going to affect all of us because it all has to be paid. It isn't pennies from heaven or the money tree.
Well, and we're because we don't have a state budget, the monetary assistance program, the MAP grant programs, which goes to needy college students, is not being funded right now. So we're able to pay out $600,000 to Salida, but our kids who benefit from the MAP program aren't getting that grant right now, and luckily the universities have said we know you're on the hook for it, so we'll keep these kids in school. But at some point, that's going to come home to roost as well. And it's really frustrating when you see these big payouts go when kids are suffering not getting their MAP.
Well, it's absolutely ludicrous, and that's why Joe and Josephine Smith, as I say out there on Main Street, they get incensed and they get mad.
Yep.
I guess those are two the same, aren't they? That's like Will Rogers said something about Congress and I forget how that was.
You got to keep your eye on Congress.
Yeah, and he said, but I repeat myself when he says they were. Anyway, the mentality when you decided to run for this office, Tim, you didn't say to yourself, well, Tim, I want to do this and I want to do that. I'll start drawing up a list of laws to introduce. It seems some of them do. They hit there and they said, well, I'm going to be a legislator, so I'm going to legislate. There's so much meaningless stuff that takes your time to study and so forth. Most of it you should throw it in the wastebasket immediately when it hits your desk. What happens down there?
Well, there's when you have 177 members of the General Assembly, you have people with different backgrounds and different passions and things like that. So I think there's some people who are more interested in diving into legislation and trying to do things. And, so I think it depends on the individual. I'm somebody who, given my background, working for Rodney Davis, working for Ray LaHood, I believe in constituent service. I think it's for me to be out and about, listening to the legislation, sure, that I'd like to see get through. But I don't make writing 100 different pieces of legislation my priority. I think it's more a matter of listening to my constituents and taking that back to the Capitol and figuring out what the big issues of the day are.
Speaking of priorities, Judith and I got so involved in a discussion this morning. We have a priority called sponsorship, and we should take a few minutes and recognize them this morning, albeit a little late. Go right ahead, Mr. Ash. Oh, the Politics to our sponsors. By golly, you almost forgot a very important piece of legislation here, Mr. Butler. Right back here live in the studio.
You always got to remember your supporters.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Don't end the Here's a Bandit knows that. Our guest this morning is Mr. Tim Butler, our representative from the 87th Legislative District. Take some time from a busy schedule to come and visit with us here in Logan County about what's going on down in Springfield, or perhaps more importantly, what's not going on. And we appreciate that. Judith Kay, I'm going to turn the mic to you. You might have something profound. Once in a while, she does that.
Or profane. You never know.
Once in a while, she does that, too.
Yeah. Seldom. You mentioned about you're not being a big supporter of just willy-nilly passing new legislation. And I commend that. I think it would be well to go back a ways and reform some of the things that have been a boondoggle for the state. For instance, workers' comp and redistricting. We used to have a state school here until Governor Ryan saw fit to kill that. And workman's comp was a big topic out there.
Huge.
So I think that the people in this area are familiar with that concept. And then, of course, the redistricting, which has always been done by how can I get the most votes,
Right.
And you did talk, you as a legislature did talk about drawing lines that were more appropriate.
For workers' compensation reform, that's at the top of the agenda. I know it's been at the top of the agenda for the governor. It's at the top of the agenda for a lot of the Republican members of the General Assembly, and I think a lot of Democrat members as well. Workers' comp is you talked about business earlier and the tax rates driving business out. Workers' comp is always something that I hear about from businesses.
Yes.
First thing.
Workers' comp is absolutely always something I hear from businesses that is a problem. I had an in-depth discussion yesterday with somebody from Springfield, with a public entity from Springfield actually, and problems that they have with the workers' compensation when they go through the process on workers' comp. We've got to reform our workers' compensation system to make it so we're more equitable across the board, and also that we need to, states like Indiana and Wisconsin and Missouri have systems that are much more competitive, and you see businesses go out of Illinois to those.
Out of the state.
So to move there,
they do.
sure.
Right. So workers' comp is at the top of the agenda. That's an issue where Speaker Madigan again has put his foot down. He's a trial lawyer. That he said that's not something that he wants to see. But I do think that's an area eventually, maybe when we get to some sort of budget deal, we could see some workers' compensation reform. A bright light on that was we did pass a law. We passed a bill this fall that reformed our unemployment insurance system in Illinois. That basically it was good on both sides. It was an agreed piece of legislation from management and labor and all sides that reined in some of the problems we have with the unemployment insurance system, and I think that's something we can use for workers' comp too.
Obviously, there's a history for handling workman's comp in a different way, a better way. Why can't we study what these surrounding states have done and make ours work too? I mean, there's no glory in having an original system if it isn't working.
There's actually a really good working group of members Actually, a couple of my fellow freshmen, a guy named Mark Batnick and a guy named Keith Wheeler, are kind of leading the charge, and they've got a good working group together that brings together some members of the General Assembly and some outside folks. They've been working on this all session long. They've got a good proposal out there. We just need to get it freed up to get a vote on it, and I my hope is we will see some changes to our workers' comp system.
And how about the gerrymandering?
So redistricting reform is something that we tried to get on the ballot a couple of years ago through the fair map process. That's something that Speaker Madigan will never allow for a vote in the House to have a constitutional amendment to allow for a nonpartisan commission to draw our maps. So there's a citizen effort out there. I've signed the petition that would call for a referendum on the ballot in the November election to put a change to our Constitution that would allow for this redistricting panel to be put in place. I think it's the right way to go. I think we need more competitive districts in Illinois. We need not so many safe Democrat and safe Republican districts. We need districts that are truly competitive. I just look at myself. The 87th district was drawn by the Speaker to pack in as many Republicans in this district as they could, because some neighboring districts then they turn into Democrat districts.
Right.
So, which is fine for me. I'm glad it's a great Republican district. It's good for me as a Republican, but I'm a freshman who was appointed to my job, who's never been on the ballot before, and I don't have anybody running against me. And that's great for me, but I don't think that's the best thing for the citizens of the district because it's such a safe Republican district, nobody even wants to run against me as an appointed freshman. So I think that speaks a lot about the need that we need to have more competitive districts in the state. And we also need districts that reflect existing government boundaries, to the best of our ability to draw in communities as a whole or counties as a whole that come into these districts that make it easier for people to understand who their representatives are.
I have a friend who moved to Logan County from Pike County. And, of course, Pike County is very Democratic. And when she got here, I'm going to clean this up for public consumption, okay, Jim?
He's got his finger on the button.
She said she felt like a wheat seed in a barrel of rat droppings. and that is true. I mean, Logan County is totally Republican.
It's very Republican.
Yeah, it is.
Which I'm glad for.
It's nice for you.
However,
nice
having said that, and you are correct, we are correct in that, happy about it, but we have had some very good members of the Democratic Party service
here locally. Oh gosh, yes.
And I've gone to the door for some of them,
Oh, sure.
Because that's the way it ought to be. If you,
and we'd vote for them still if they were here.
Even if they were Presbyterians.
So what's the matter with Presbyterians?
Quickly, before we get to that clock on the wall, which I really object to this morning, your district, Representative Butler, tell us about the geography of your district so that the taxpayers will have a better understanding.
It takes in 87th district takes in all of Logan County, all of Menard County, the northern and eastern parts of Sangamon County, so it actually goes into Springfield. I live in Springfield, so northern and eastern Sangamon, and then the southern half of Tazewell. It goes as far north. I go into Pekin, and then it gets everything south half of Tazewell County.
That's pretty far flung.
It's all our parts of 4 counties. It's certainly not the largest state house district in the state. There's some of my colleagues that have 7, I think maybe 9 counties. I think one of the guys down in Southern Illinois has 11 counties in his district. But for me, it's easy to get around on Interstate 55 and 155 north and south. And I try to travel the district. I can be anywhere in no more than an hour in my district, and I kind of pride myself on making sure that I'm out and about.
And you do get out and about. Now, the clock has made it mandatory that we come with one final question. If you had a magic wand, Tim, you'd wave that, and what would happen in Springfield?
Well, I go back to the budget issue. I think if I had a magic wand, I would pass a budget that makes us live within our means at $32 billion, and that's what we need to do. I mean, that's the number one thing.
Amen and amen.
Well, I had a rather acerbic quote about legislators And I'm going to defer because we have a nice young man across the room from us, Judith Kay. So I'm going to scratch that one, written by Glenn Nofziger, who didn't have much good to say about legislators, period.
You can wait till Congressman LaHood's in here. You can use that on him.
Yeah. I did find one that said, a legislator cannot be effective while suffering the public scorn. There's something to be said for that. Thank you very much, Tim Butler, for being with us this morning, sir.
Yeah.